Uh, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. And then over in Proverbs 25:28. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Okay, so the Proverbs is the book of wisdom and gives us wisdom about how to live and how to be pleasing to God and how to live life well, and teaches us about spiritual matters. I just wanted to do the study and figure out, what are these things saying to us? How can it improve our lives? How can it make us better Christians? So these two Proverbs, it's talking about ruling one's spirit. So ruling, what's that? That's setting something in order, making rules, enforcing rules, having a vision, creating order, organizing things. If you're ruling a city, it will say, well, I guess the closest modern equivalent we have is like a mayor, I guess. And I don't know how many mayors come to mind when you say they ruled well, but I think most people is probably thinking of Giuliani in New York, back in when the crime wasn't as high as it was. I've never been in New York, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's what they say, right? So, but the word is that he got rid of the crime. That's setting things in order, enforcing rules, right? All right. And so these two proverbs, they're talking favorably about ruling one's spirit is even better than taking a city. And it's also, so one is for taking a city, one's for keeping a city. So there are people who rule their spirits well and people who don't. That we kind of get that by implication here. In Proverbs 16:32, it's implying that it has something to do with controlling your anger. All right. Now, I'm not going to go there just yet. We'll go there later. But in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 17 through 24, that speaks to the members of the body of Christ about renewing the spirit of our mind. Christ grants the ability to the Gentiles who have been utterly conquered by sin. We'll see that a little bit later. And they're having reprobate minds. And Jesus takes the city back and restores life and agency to it. So, form of order. You don't have agency without some sort of order in your life. But okay, back to the city metaphor. What does God mean by a walled city? How is a walled city like a person? I think I would describe it as this concept of habitable order. We're talking about order, and order leads to the ability to live, to inhabit. People in a walled city have time to safely organize their lives, to create things, to live. The wall keeps out the chaos. The wall keeps out the thieves and the wild animals. It keeps out the pillaging armies. Those things stay outside so that inside people can have a form of a context and some expectation of stability, right? Life is a bit unstable if you never know when something's going to come by and destroy everything you built and take everything you have. You might say that if that's your expectation, you might not bother to build anything, right? You might not bother to set your life in order, because why bother doing that work when it's just going to be taken away, right? But if there's a wall, it protects those things. You can have that context there. And people inside of a city can then build a career, run an economy, build a business, create art, all that kind of stuff. These are the kinds of things that they do. And the walls keep the bad things out so that good things can be created and maintained within. I think that's what we mean that's why the Bible is going to this idea of the walled city. And the first thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about a walled city in the Bible is Nehemiah. We're going to go there in a minute, but, oh yeah, got ahead of myself. A person is also an ordered being. So there's the ordered city, a symbol of order, protecting it. And a person's like that too. We're also ordered. We need order. We need protection. We have a spirit, a soul, and a body, and those things were joined together by God and is operating all together according to his design until sin enters in or the curse somehow causes a problem, but ideally it goes according to his design. And we also have defenses and aspects of ourselves that require defense. I would also say these things are worth taking and defending your spirit, soul, and body. Okay, and Satan also thinks so because he's also always seeking to take them, seeking to conquer them, like a roaring lion. All right, so let's go over to Nehemiah. We're going to kind of like gloss through the story there because it's a long story. Which way am I supposed to go? There it is. It's to the left of Proverbs. Okay. All right, and we're in Nehemiah. Jerusalem begins the book broken down. See Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So not only were the people left in Jerusalem suffering, but people were also saying bad things about them. I think the last time I was up here, I talked about the words reproach and reproof, if I remember correctly. But a reproach is like, casting an aspersion or verbal judgment of some sort. People were saying bad things about them. And their enemies mocked them in chapter 2. There's that bit about the fox going up on the wall and breaking it down. And the enemies were also getting angry that the wall is rebuilt in chapter 4. Okay. And then their enemies conspired to sneak in and prevent the repairs in verse 11 of chapter 4. And our adversary said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst of them and slay them and cause the work to cease. That work being the rebuilding of the city, the setting of things in order, the protecting of it. And in response, Israel prepared itself to defend while building in verse 17 of chapter 4. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laid it, everyone with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. And there's the full illustration: protection, defense and building. You need both. This is a great illustration of how useful walls are. They provide a passive defense and prevent sneak attacks. See, when you don't have a passive defense, you got to distract yourself from building because your other hand has to be on a weapon the whole time. One might say it's possible to keep a city without walls as long as there's an army. It would take an extreme and persistent level of battle preparedness and vigilance, and that's actually talked about in the rest of this chapter. The people would have to stay always equipped and on the lookout. In the end of chapter 4, it even says that they had to sleep in their clothes. They wore the same clothes for working and for fighting and to bed. And they took their clothes off only to get them washed. It's totally unsustainable. Can you guys think how rough that would be? That's really camping out. And they never get any real rest. It's always, it's always vigilance there. Because they also have a city. Skipped a line there. The enemies get to rest, though. because the enemies know when they're going to attack. They're not busy building anything. They just destroy things. And they have a city in which they can rest. That's just not a sustainable situation. And if you have a wall, you can also rest easy knowing you're safe. By the way, it's also interesting to see building and defending juxtaposed. One hand is building, the other hand is defending. Both are essential for people to make progress. Okay, so how does this all relate to people ruling their spirits? All right, so ruling, you need to set up a design, you need to have your defenses ready, etc. You need to be ready to build. But first of all, what's vulnerable? So we understand how a city is vulnerable. Marauders come in and take your stuff and burn your houses and what have you. But what about a person? Like, how does a person fit into this metaphor? So Proverbs 16:32 connects the ability to rule in spirit with the ability to control anger. So he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, or someone who can rule their spirit is better than someone who can take a city. In this ability is the metaphorical wall in Proverbs 25:28. So ruling your spirit is associated with controlling your anger. Having a wall, not having a wall is like someone who can't rule their spirit, right? So it's the same ability to rule one's spirit that does those things. Okay. So I would submit that this is the mind that we're talking about, the vulnerable thing. What is it that controls anger? I think that you have to train yourself, and you have to think about it. You have to meditate, but that's all happening inside your mind. And as Pastor Osteen is fond of saying, the spiritual battleground is the mind. I think I agree with that. And what's attacking it? Well, there's evil influences, there's our temptations, and there's devils, there's spiritual wickedness. And I'll also add to that doctrines, evil doctrines of devils. So let's put some meat on this theory here. What's the, I don't want to say the first sin in the Bible, but maybe the second sin. Let's go to Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4. All right. Remember Cain and Abel. So God did not have respect unto Cain's offering. And some envy or pride got past his defenses, got in there, right? And his countenance fell. Then God told him in Genesis 4:7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. I think this implies a moment to make a decision, because God points out, like, hey, this is a decision. Like, here's well, here's not well. Which one are you going to pick? Right? In other words, rule your spirit. Like, rulers make decisions. And make it do well and repair the breach. If you got a hole in your wall, it's a deliberate decision to go and fix the hole. You see the hole, it's no longer an ignorant thing. You go and fix it. Or not, It's not something that just kind of, is there and happens to you and things just happen to you. Well, things do happen to people that way. Some people never go through their life never making decisions, but that I wouldn't call that being a good ruler. All right. So he left the breach there, and if he doesn't repair it, and he didn't, then he decided to rule over the calamity of a defenseless city by letting the sin in, and that's what happened. So, and the story goes on. Something overcame Cain from within, probably anger, okay? And he murdered Abel. I think that's probably the first illustration in the Bible of the principle in Proverbs 16:32. No rule over his anger. So it doesn't say he was angry, but we can easily see how that might be the case. Or you can easily see how something else can overcome someone and cause that to happen. But the reason it got in there is because he had a hole in the wall. All right? Cain decided to be wrong, not accepted, to commit to his position ultimately. So think this is like ultimate commitment to the thing you're wrong about, because he went and murdered the person who was right about that thing. That was Abel. This is the essence of the reprobate mind. If you guys have studied reprobate mind, reprobate means it's not acceptable. There's something deeply flawed about it. It's so wrong that it can't come back, in a way. So this is what it means to place good for evil, evil for good, right for wrong, wrong for right. To be wrong and kind of like wrong on purpose, I would say. And when you go so far as to be wrong on purpose, there's like, what redemption is there? That's what I think the reprobate mind is. We'll look at that a little more in Ephesians chapter 4. It's given to wickedness as a result. That's how someone becomes given to it. And going back to our Proverbs metaphor, that mind is a conquered city. There's no walls anymore. It's given over. It's given over to whatever came in, right? Whatever, if there's a city without walls, whatever army comes along that decides that they want that city, they're going to have it. That's the way it is. All right. And Cain's, just to say through the end of the story, it's not a good story. Cain's story ends with all of his descendants also succumbing to evil influences, and eventually God wipes out his entire bloodline in the flood. If you recall, the bloodline of Noah's ancestor was Seth, and Seth was Cain's brother that replaced, or I don't want to say replaced, but he was born after Abel was killed. All right, let's go after another principle here. Let's go into James chapter 1. I think this goes together, even though James is written to a different dispensation. We have a principle here. Okay. James 1:13 through 15 gives us a good description of the city's vulnerability that works in every dispensation. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So let's have maybe a more relatable illustration. I don't think many of us can relate to murder that much. But this is a little bit more accessible probably. Let's have an illustration. So we'll say you don't roll over your spirit well in some aspect for some reason, and your wall has a breach in our metaphor here. Devil comes through and tempts you to commit gluttony, and you just love eating hamburgers. You start to become given to hamburgers. I'm sorry, I pick on gluttony a lot, don't I? But I think it's very relatable. It's relatable to me. I know I'm not that thick, but Angelica reminds me I'm always getting thicker. So anyways. The illustration, eating hamburgers. Nothing wrong with a hamburger. But you just start eating like 6 or 7 a day. You just can't stop, all right? Each one gives your brain a good dopamine hit, and it rewires your brain, and you just want to eat more and more, right? And you still don't rule your spirit, and the devils in the city come into your mind, and you just start rationalizing that The devils are inside your city, and they start attacking one of your infrastructures here. And it's your reason. And you start rationalizing. You know, my arteries are only at 10% right now, so there's still plenty of room, right? It's rationalizing. All right. Now the devils, you know, you still haven't said, you haven't repelled them. You don't have a wall yet. You didn't set anything up because you don't rule your spirit well. They go after your emotions next. And your emotions start going, and you know, as time goes on, every time you go without a hamburger, you just get more and more hangry. You get so hangry that people just don't want to deal with it. And it's like, I don't want to deal with you. Just go ahead and have one. Leave me alone. You know? All right. And then you still don't rule your spirit. You don't repair the breach. You don't you don't repel the devils. And they go after your habits. So that's another part of your mind that it goes after. And your habits, you just start developing these behavior patterns. You make sure that there's a McDonald's on your way to work, you know. You start changing your schedule so that you always have time to have another hamburger. And you change your routine so that it always just works out. You get to 8 or 9 a day now. All right? And then finally, it starts to corrupt into your natural affections, right? And you start ignoring people that you care about because they say to lay off the hamburgers a little bit, you know, because they care about you. They don't want your arteries to get all the way to 90%. All right, so I'm being a little, you know, this is a little humorous, but the illustration, you know, for each of us, we're meant to replace eating hamburgers, gluttony, with whatever the sin is that besets each of us, right? So for me, growing up, that was video games. So well, that's one of the reasons why Angelica and I don't even have a television in our house. We don't keep it. It's for a few reasons, but one of the reasons was I was hopelessly addicted to video games when I was growing up. Hopelessly. I don't think that's really an issue for many people in here probably, but that's why I went with the hamburger illustration. I'm just kidding. Anyways, you're probably rolling your eyes. Video games? Why do you want to play those things? I looking back on it, it's like I must have been insane. Anyway, but you know, they kind of give you a dopamine hit because you feel like you did something when you know you really didn't. And that's how I eventually got out of it, is because I realized I'm just flipping bits inside of a microchip. I'm not actually getting anything done here. Then it sort of started making me depressed, and that's how the Lord reached me. But anyways, but yeah, this is the pattern. It's the battlefield is your mind, and the sin gets in there somehow. And the metaphor is it's a city and it needs a wall. All right. Maybe for someone else, it's evil music. Music can be very, very addicting. There's a lot of music that just doesn't appeal to me, but I understand how people get appealed into things, and it's bad for them. And especially music, it bypasses all your defenses. Like that's kind of what it does. That's kind of what it's meant to do. It goes through, and whatever message it's carrying just goes straight through the wall. You know? Maybe it's drugs. Maybe it's laziness. Maybe it's porn. Maybe it's homosexuality. Maybe it's something else. There's a lot of evils today that are becoming more and more prevalent that I think they all fundamentally go in through the same way. They find a breach in the wall. You didn't fend it off or build a wall, and it did some damage. All right? You know, maybe it's because you didn't have any examples growing up. Maybe it's because your parents never taught you anything. You know, that's true in many cases, you know. Maybe it's because you just had a certain proclivity and you got exposed to a certain kind of evil at a certain time in your life, and it just got in your head and lived there. All right? Maybe this sin that got in conquered you completely, and your mind became reprobate. and now there's no way back for you, not without some kind of miracle. Well, in any case, you weren't born that way, okay? Jesus Christ can retake that city too, if you want it to be. All right, now let's go over to Ephesians chapter 4. All right, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling, have given themselves over to lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But ye have not so learned Christ, if so be that ye have heard him, and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that ye put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. And here's our cure. It says it there. Let's see, what verse was it? Yeah, verse 21. If so be that ye have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus. So, how do you build that wall? How do you have your defense? All right. Comparing this passage also with Romans chapter 1. Actually, let's go ahead and go to Romans chapter 1. I think these passages go pretty well in parallel. In verse 24 through 32. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. So here we already see in Ephesians where we're saying the Gentiles were totally given over to it. And then over here it says God gave them up. Right? They're given. They're owned by someone else now. Verse 25, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Now let's pause here just for a second. Just thinking about our past illustration, how we all know as humans how the sin builds up and builds up, how the temptation grows and how we let it, right? Certain things you can do more damage than other things you can do. Certain things the human mind is trained to or designed to respond more and to be reinforced more than other things, right? And in this passage, Paul is talking about one of those things, you know, the healthy sexual relationship between a husband and a wife is meant to bond them together forever. And here, that same powerful, aspect of your mind is, being used for ultimate corruption. So it's like hamburgers, but times a million, right? Anyway, I think we're on verse 29. Yeah, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them, working all lasciviousness with greediness, as Paul said in Ephesians. And this is a lot more than just the sins that were spoken of earlier here. He's going into all sins. Like this is now, kind of indicating a corruption of attitude, right? So even if your attitude, every part of your fiber gets eventually bent towards the thing that you like to do, because that's how the human mind works. That's why it is the battlefield. It takes over more and more, like a city without walls, until the whole thing is gone. All right. So, and this is the mention of the reprobate mind. This is what I think we can call that. That's a biblical concept here in the mind. This is why Paul tells us we need the hearing and the teaching of Jesus, who is the truth, to bring a reprobate mind back to conquer that city, reconquer it, and build the walls. And how do we build the walls? We need to hear the word of God. That's the hearing of Jesus Christ, because he's the truth. Of course, merely hearing is not going to do much if you don't want to hear and you're not willing to receive that knowledge, okay? But it's the teaching. That's why the second point came up. And now we can go over to one of our favorite sets of verses in 2 Timothy. You all know the place, I'm pretty sure. 2 Timothy chapter 2. All right, so what is the reprobate mind? What does reprobate mean? It means a mind that's broken in a way such that it cannot be approvable. It is an unapprovable mind. So then what should you do if that's the problem and you need to fix it? Well, 2 Timothy 2:15-16 says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, but shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness." That's laid out pretty plain right there, I think. You have to study. And study is work. And kind of like when you do work to seek the truth, to know to hear Jesus in his words, and to know them, to put them into yourselves, that kind of shows that, well, it sort of proves that you're not a reprobate in a way, or at the very least, gets you on the road to recovery. Because the study itself, that gets the word into you, that gets the knowledge into you. That's what the word study actually means. And then, so I picked these two verses together because, again, we go back to the illustration of building in one hand and defending with the other, right? So you study to build, and you shun the profane and vain babblings to defend. And that's actually your wall. That's the passive defense we're looking for. So if you study, the word gets inculcated into you. That means it's such a part of you that it sort of happens automatically, right? So you see something evil and it gets into your head, and the first thoughts that come up are like, wow, that's evil. That's evil because, these people, these humanists over here are saying that a woman's mind can be in a man's body. That's nonsense. That's just automatic, right? If you don't have a reprobate mind, that's your automatic response, because you already know that God made them male and female. And it's obvious. It's written in the Bible. Not only that, but you can see it with your eyes. And if you have a heart that's just willing to believe the truth that's plainly in front of you, you'll be happy to accept it. But if you've got a reprobate mind that's willing to see anything, justify anything, to have your own way and to believe what you want to believe, you'll go even as far as to think that men can become women and vice versa, right? That's kind of how it works. But if you study, when someone offers you a strong drink, the first thing in your mind is like, oh, there's a lot of warnings about that. I should think about this for a second, okay? All right? And so on and so forth. That's about as passive as you can get. Well, okay, there's a little bit more passive. How about just shun it? If there's a place or thing you can do, which is, it happened before. Oh, something came up last time that gave me a red flag. Maybe I'll just shun that thing. Maybe you're in a group of friends a new group of friends perhaps, and a few of them start telling off-color jokes, and it starts making you feel uncomfortable, right? Or maybe they start telling stories about people, and they're like rumors. It starts making you feel uncomfortable, and then you remember from your study, oh, yeah, where there's no talebearers, the strife ceaseth. Back to Proverbs, right? And then that just comes up of its own accord. You don't even have to work for that. It just comes up, and you just have to listen. Or perhaps you even had to deal with something, right? And this is a problem I had to deal with not too long ago. But, and it's also like a talebearer situation. Sometimes I have a habit of maybe divulging a little too much information, not to tell talebearers, but because I like to help people and such. Well, it's naivete, we'll say. But it blew up into a huge dramatic thing, and then the next thing comes along, well, I go into the Bible, get some wisdom, and I keep my mouth shut more often. Right? And that helps, because after the devils get in, break through the wall or whatever, you have to beat them off with the sword of the Spirit, and that's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress, some danger, right? And then you repair the breach, and next time something like that happens again, whoa, let's stay away from there. All right. And the last thing, so shunning. You can't get more passive than that. It's just not even there. There's nothing there for you to worry about, because that evil is happening somewhere else, and you're over here. So that's your wall. Handle the things that you can handle. Shun the things that you can't. If it's profane, and if it's vain, if there's no reason for you to be there, there's no good to be had. Share the gospel if you get a chance to do that, but there's no reason for you to continually receive evil influences and inputs that you don't need to have. All right. You don't even need to deal with them actively. Okay. And that's making good decisions as a ruler of your spirit. All right, I think we're going to stop it right there. Thank you.